Thanks to AG1 for sponsoring this episode of 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast. If you haven't heard, AG1 is a comprehensive and convenient blend of over 70 high-quality ingredients, and it is so easy to drink. The first thing I do when I get up in the morning is add a scoop of AG1 to some cold water, give it a shake and drink. It's as easy as that, and it is now part of my morning ritual. If, like me, you're trying to be healthier for 2025, then AG1 is one of the easiest things that you can do. It contains vitamins and nutrients to support your immune system and key minerals and natural ingredients to help maintain energy levels and focus. As AG1 is a more-in-one supplement, it is so much simpler than stocking up on lots of different vitamins, lotions and potions, and it's a really easy way to support a healthier lifestyle. 1 scoop of AG1 per day supports energy, digestive regularity, immune defence and a healthy mood, so I'll be ready to take on whatever this year has in store for me. Looking to give AG1 a shot? Subscribe now and get a free bottle of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first subscription. Go to drinkag1.com/1865 and get started today. That's drinkag1.com/1865.
Whether you're ordering wings for the game, whipping up a 7-layer dip, or ordering pizza, there's something about football that makes you want to eat. And this football season, Uber Eats has the best deals on game day food. No matter what you're craving, from 2-for-1 pizza to buy one, get one wings, Uber Eats will be dropping new deals each week, all season long. Uber Eats, official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. Terms and conditions apply. See app for details.
Since you're new to H&R Block, we'll look at your returns from the last 3 years for any money your last guy might have missed, for free.
I could get money back from last year?
You could. We'll find any mistakes.
Could have really used that 2 years ago when I dated that mistake for 5 months.
Don't leave money on the table. Switch to H&R Block and get a free second look review. Second look is included at no additional cost with the purchase of tax preparation. Results vary. All tax situations are different. Fees apply if you have us file an amended return.
Hello and welcome to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast. I'm Stephen Topolis. Don't forget to listen to our 1994-95 season review when we look back on that brilliant season for Frank Clark's Forest side. Part 1 is out now and it's in your podcast feed, so do have a listen back to that one.
Years ago, Forest got absolutely battered by Blackburn Rovers, and it brought to an end a really long unbeaten run. And then the following week they played like, well, lions against Lyon. So it just shows that sometimes you can bounce back from a mauling. And today, Nottingham Forest, having been beaten deservedly 5-0 away at Bournemouth, came back and beat Brighton and Hove Albion 7-0. Welcome to the 1865 match report with me, Rich Ferraro, and Baz. We're recording this pretty much straight after the match. How was that for you?
Absolutely glorious. By the way, I just have to apologise as well. The Blackburn Rovers loss was my fault. I'd been wearing my white hooded top, black jeans, a massive baggy black jeans, and a certain pair of Nike trainers. And then that was the first game in the entire unbeaten run that I didn't wear them. So it's entirely down to me.
That was the 90s for you kids. Let's just, before we go into the actual meat and drink of the match, the other thing that's worth pointing out is that Bournemouth was unexpected, it was painful, it was horrible. But today, Forest basically meted out similar kind of treatment to Brighton in that they just kept going and kept scoring, and crucially they've already repaired the goal difference damage done from last week.
Yeah, and I think probably the two most pleasing things are, one, it was a clean sheet, and two, it's the first time in years we've been really ruthless and totally punished a team.
Yes, so let's go into talking about the game itself. So Forest did make some changes to the team. So Matt Sells was in goal, but it's a back three of Morato, Milenkovic and Murillo. More on that in a bit. We had Aina and Williams at right and left wing back respectively. And we had Elliot Anderson alongside the returning Danilo, with Morgan Gibbs-White playing slightly ahead of them behind Anthony Elanga and Chris Wood. And Baz, talk to me about that team selection. Were you surprised, firstly, when you heard that we'd reverted to a three at the back, and then secondly, in terms of the way that they actually lined up?
Well, I was interested to see what we'd do, whether it would be... I was expecting Ramon Sosa to come in and carry on with the 4-2-3-1 sort of thing, but it's not a surprise. And actually, and we'll talk about the tactics of the game in a bit, I guess, but it was the perfect thing to do against this Brighton side. I'd also say that we basically played with a flat midfield three. Morgan wasn't really ahead of the other two. It was just he was more likely to break forwards when we got an attack.
So it's actually more of a 3-5-2?
Yeah.
Or a 3-5-1-1 maybe even?
Yeah.
Okay, and let's just point out as well, as you talked to me about before we started recording, Brighton, for some reason, decided to play 4-1-5. And so they basically had no midfield at all, did they?
Yeah, they had Hinchelwood, who I think is coming back from injury.
He's coming back from injury and he's still just a young lad.
Yeah, I mean, from what I've seen of him, I really like him as a player, but they had 5 forwards on the pitch at once, and so us playing a back 5, first of all, it counted the numbers, and then 2, it meant that whenever, and then they also, the way they play, they push their fullbacks right up high up the pitch, so it basically, Herzl played entirely into our hands. It's like he'd never seen us play before.
So you're saying that he was playing a 3-1-6?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Does that even add up?
2 ones.
Yeah. So and then with Forest, the other thing that I just want to point out in terms of the lineup was also thinking about the fact that with the back 3, slight change from when we've seen Forest play with the back 3 before, in that before Milenkovic pulled over to the right, Murillo in the middle, and then Morato on the left. But they actually had the big Serb in the middle of the back 3, didn't they, with Morato covering the right-hand side?
Yeah. Which kind of made sense, I guess, but just because there's more similarity between Morato and Murillo in the way they play.
Yeah. And I guess it's pretty much potluck as to which one covers the wrong side, as it were, isn't it? OK, so it didn't... I was going to say it didn't take long for Forest to get going. One of the things that I would point out is that for those of you who listened to our match report last week, Tom pointed out that you can tell in the first 10 minutes generally how Forest are going to do. And, of course, we scored the opening goal after officially 12 minutes, but effectively after 10 minutes. And... but Brighton did start brightly for the first 5 minutes, didn't they?
I'd say probably the goal was, if not our first attack, it was certainly definitely our first shot. And it was the standard thing where Brighton had lots and lots of the possession. They had lots of the ball just crossing over the halfway line, and then they'd run into the brick wall of our back 5. Mm-hmm. And but they would keep the possession. We didn't really get the chance to counter at all because we didn't win it back off them. So it was just them tapping the ball about, trying to find a way through.
Which is actually what we like.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And then the goal, when it came, was down to Morgan Gibbs-White breaking, and again, that kind of slightly fluid nature of the midfield and attack, with Elanga playing off Wood and then Morgan being the breaking midfielder, I guess.
Well, so, I mean, we could talk about this later on, because I noticed this pattern happening a lot. So, Elanga and Wood were basically playing as 2 strikers. But what would happen is, as soon as we won the ball back... So, in this particular case, we won the ball back. The ball got played to Morgs, who was breaking down the right-hand side. So as soon as that happened, Wood would stay central and Elanga would broke down the left-hand side, trying to stretch their defence. And so that left a bit more space for Morgan to run into. Mm-hmm. And then Wood was charging down at the far post, and To be fair, Morgs was put in a low cross to try and catch Wood, and Dunk basically, I think he was off balance and basically caught it completely wrong and put it in.
Yeah, the defender's quandary, isn't it? You try and get in the way, but sometimes it bounces off you and goes the wrong way. And then, I mean, so by the sounds of it, you think that's pretty much against the run of play?
As much as anything we do is against the run of play, yeah.
Everything we do is against the run of play.
It was pretty much it was certainly the first meaningful attack I can remember us having.
Yeah, okay. And then, having created a goal, Morgan Gibbs-White got the second.
Yeah, so this was, I think it was Anderson lost the ball in the midfield and he was like surrounded by yellow shirts. But Murillo steps forward out of the back five and then plays this like curling ball. And because Brighton pushed their fullbacks forward, then there was acres of space down the sides. And again, Elanga went one way. I think it was Morgs went the other way. And it resulted in this corner. Elanga takes the corner because he seems to be our chief set piece taker at the moment. And Morgan just sort of does this like little diagonal run at the near post, gets his head on the ball, and it goes in. But I'm pretty sure, I've not watched it back, but I think he was unmarked. But then Morata was just behind him as well. So even if Morgan hadn't got it, then Morata would have been there to get it. But it was a great header and a really, really good goal.
And, I mean, Gibbs-White isn't the biggest player, is he? So he needed to, just lose his marker and just get that yard. He's good with his head, but he's not the biggest, so he had to get there. And then, I mean, at that point, how comfortable were you feeling?
Pretty comfortable, actually. Again, Brighton, they had this line of five with the two fullbacks pushing up. And that meant that every time we got the ball back, whoever it was that won possession back just needed to look up and choose which flank to play down, whether it was the one that Elanga had broken down or that Morgan had broken down. And so the entire first half was... And I really like these the crossfield balls that just open up the play. And that's what it was, is as soon as we won the ball, they were in danger because they had 2 plus Hinshelwood back, and then we would have 3 going forwards, and the person with the ball would have been in acres of space because of the crossfield pass.
Yeah. So basically ripping them open due to the lack of security they had in midfield.
Yeah.
Okay. It wasn't that long after the second goal before Forest scored the third, and Chris Wood scored his first of the afternoon. Now, with this one, this is the one that the commentators are describing as, it's a classic number 9's goal, isn't it?
It's not. It's a classic winger's goal. Elanga was outstanding throughout the entire game, but that's because Brighton as well made it easy for him, but he really wanted it.
Yeah.
And I think it's Lamptey he went up against, turned him inside out, put the cross in. Wood did his normal thing of like taking the step back and then moving forward again to build himself the space, so he was completely unmarked and he's not going to miss.
Okay. And then, oddly enough, so although Forest were dominant in terms of scoreline, Brighton came perilously close to getting a goal back not long afterwards. And now I've not seen this back, but Welbeck had a shot. He cut inside, had the shot, and then it hit the bar and bounced down off the line. Now, I've not seen it back, but apparently it was an incredible save by Sells.
Yeah, I thought so. What actually? Yeah, so one of I think it was Anderson gave it away, and then their player played it through his legs to get Welbeck onto it. He puts his shot in. I thought it had hit the bar. We all looked, and it. From where the angle I was at, I couldn't tell if it had gone over the line or not.
All eyes on the referee looking at his watch.
And then Sells catches it as it bounces. And then I was looking at the running commentary thing on one of the sites, and it said, Sells, looking at the replay, Sells got his fingertips to it, so it was actually a great save.
And apparently, I've heard it described as 7/8 of the ball was over the line, but not quite the whole ball. So, in that respect, were Forest lucky to preserve the clean sheet, or was it something whereby it was no more than they deserved?
Brighton had a couple of other shots as well, but they were pretty tame. And yeah, I don't think 3-0 flattered us. Possibly it was harsh on Brighton just because they'd had all the ball, but then that's what you get when you play against Forest.
So it was 3-0 at half-time, and then Brighton came out making a triple substitution to try and, well, I think, try and turn things around. And you know, I guess it's one of those things. We've seen Forest make substitutions at key times to try and turn things around, but it either works or it doesn't. So they brought on Adingra and Gomez and O'Reilly to try and actually add a bit of presence into the midfield instead of Kaoru Mitoma and João Pedro and Hinchelwood, who was on a yellow card as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's the biggest surprise of the first half for me was Ola Aina had Mitoma completely in his pocket. I mean, we know that Aina's very, very... He's probably one of the best fullbacks in the league. But Mitoma just wasn't there, whether it's because his head had been turned by this bid from Saudi Arabia or whatever. He was doing nothing in the entire game, so it wasn't that much of a surprise to see him replaced, and it wasn't that much of a surprise to see them actually put some midfielders on, although only 2 midfielders and taking one of them off, so it still left them outnumbered whenever we broke forwards. What I will say is the first 10-15 minutes of the second half actually were quite nervy and very, very horrible. There was a lot of feeling of shades of Southampton here, because not only did Brighton have a lot of the ball, but they were pressing us back, so we were sitting a lot deeper. So when we did win the ball back, and I've mentioned this before, is we're not a low block side. We play high up the pitch, which means that when we win the ball back, although there is space for us to run into, it's only half the pitch we have to run. Whereas they had us penned right in, sort of just in front of the D or inside the penalty area. So when we got the ball back, not only did they have all these numbers forwards, so we were struggling to actually clear it to earn another red shirt. But on the few times when we did manage to get the decent pass in, the runner had nowhere to run to because they had too much distance to get across. So actually it felt quite nervy for the first 10-15 minutes of the second half.
So getting a goal after 20 minutes of the second half was a welcome response. Yes,
I think that's, more than anything, that was the turning point in the game, because if they'd got the next goal, I could see us doing a Southampton and getting nervous.
Talk us through then Chris Wood's second goal of the afternoon, which came on 64 minutes.
Once more, it was all Anthony Elanga. Obviously, Anthony Elanga against Lewis Dunk, and who's the other one?
Van Hecke, yeah.
Neither of them are the fastest, and if Anthony Elanga picks it up deep and then gets a head of steam up, he's unstoppable. So he just turned them inside out, ran past them, and then puts in a low cross, and Wood does his thing again. It's a very, very, maybe a yard out for a tap-in.
And Chris Wood has now got his best goal return in the Premier League.
I think it's his best goal return ever, isn't it, in a season?
Quite possibly, yeah. And that wasn't enough for him because then Forest, not long afterwards, won a penalty. And this sounds like it was just Brighton losing their heads.
Well, so actually, it was a corner. I think it was a corner. Anyways, but it was a replay of the corner where Gibbs-White scored. So he was trying to do the same thing and ghost in at the near post. Except this time, and again, I think it might be Lamptey, was aware of him, and rather than trying to get in front of him, basically hauled him down by the shoulders and pushed him into the post.
Was it Stonewall?
Yes.
Okay, because, I think people often think about wrestling in the box from set pieces, and people seem to get away with it a lot, don't they? So
this was he grabbed him by the shoulders and shoved him. It wasn't wrestling.
Okay. And was there ever any doubt about firstly, who was going to take the penalty, and secondly, were they going to score from it?
There was no doubt it was going to be Chris Wood taking it just because he was on a hat-trick.
And also, he does seem to have become the first-choice penalty taker.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm always nervous for penalties just because they're penalties. But, and I mean, again, I've not seen it back, but I don't think necessarily it was the greatest penalty. It was quite close to the keeper. But at the form he's in, you wouldn't really bet against him, would you?
Yeah. I also love the fact that with penalties, there's always a bit of confirmation bias the way people describe them. It's like, it's a great penalty. Well, it's a great penalty because the keeper didn't save it. If the keeper had gone the other way or stuck a hand out or whatever, then it was a terrible penalty. So Chris Wood gets a hat-trick, and not for the first time in a Forest shirt. It's his second hat-trick of the season after scoring getting a 3-goal haul for New Zealand against Samoa. So this is a guy in superb and supreme form, and we will probably talk about him in a little while in a bit more detail. But the goals weren't over. Now, I think what we can do is we'll skip forward 20 minutes because there are a few substitutions. So Danilo comes off. So Dominguez comes on for Danilo. We had Murillo going off, looking like he may have been carrying his belt and braces. Let's take the precaution and remove him.
He's obviously had a few injury problems in the last few weeks. So I thought I didn't see any sign of him asking to go off, but it kind of made sense. It made sense to me that he was the one to come off. Yeah.
Okay. And then we had Big Willie coming on for Murillo on 72 minutes. We had Gibbs-White going off and replaced by Jota in a double substitution with Bolly. And then later on, we saw the introduction of Taiwo Awoniyi for the hat-trick hero and the return of Ibrahim Sangare for Elliot Anderson. Presumably, this was to stop Anderson getting booked, because he gets booked every match otherwise.
I think he'd already been booked as well. I can't remember. But, I was a little bit surprised at that. I was expecting Nuno to take Elanga off.
Yeah, and maybe put on either Sosa or...
No, I'll put Anderson out on the wing.
Oh, right, okay.
Just with Sangare coming on.
Okay, yeah.
Just to give us that bit of extra solidity that we didn't really need.
But also, if you're trying to get a player to return from injury after a long period out, then when you're 5-0 up, it's a good time to do it, isn't it?
And again, I wasn't surprised to see Taiwo coming on, because if you need to give someone some minutes, that's also the best time to do it. And
the two subs were very much involved in the frankly farcical events leading up to goal number 6. So it was Taiwo, it was Sangare. Was there a handball? Was there a penalty? Neco Williams didn't hang around to find out, and he just blasted it home. But then you had to wait for VAR.
Well, so I mean, so the bloke next to me, I just literally said what I just said there about giving Taiwo some minutes. And Taiwo's first touch was awful. He tried to play a through ball and got it completely wrong. And the bloke next to me goes, he really hasn't got it. And I was like, yeah, most of his goals just come off his shins, don't they? Which is true, but it's also good. You can't complain at it. And then for the actual goal, he did his usual thing of sort of bundling through the Brighton defence, stuck his shin out to get a shot in, which wasn't necessarily the greatest shot, but is the sort of thing that he scores. And is it Verbrugge?
Verbruggen, yeah.
Yeah, he saved it, but he could only push it out. At that point, one of the Brighton defenders basically barges into Taiwo and completely sends him flying. But while they're busy staring at Taiwo, Neco cuts in.
Oh, was it Sangare who got bundled over, I believe?
Oh, was it Sangare?
Yeah.
But, so Neco cuts in the confusion and just basically rams it into the roof of the net. Now, I didn't see the incident, so this is like 5 minutes after. There was an incident on the far side of the pitch by the dugouts. And what I did see, so something or the other happened while Forest had a break on, and Nuno actually stepped out onto the pitch and put his arms around Neco and pulled him back so he couldn't retaliate.
Oh.
And so I don't know what it was, but I think Neco was particularly satisfied to score that goal.
Well, he certainly celebrated. Well, I mean, actually, first goal of the season, but still. And Yeah, and there was some controversy. So I believe that VAR was firstly checking should there have been a penalty, but there's an advantage because Forest scored. And then secondly, was there a handball by Sangare when he went down? But presumably that was overruled by the fact that he was brought down. And secondly, it's only a handball against the goal scorer if you're the goal scorer. And he wasn't the goal scorer, but it would have been a penalty anyway. So
I didn't know anything about that. I thought maybe there was a penalty, but Neco scored. So
well, and then you did know about what happened about a minute and a half later when Brighton once again. If you're going to have a bad day, you might as well make it a really bad day.
Well, so the me and the bloke next to me started chanting, "We want 7, we want 7," and then Jota scores. It's not often you actually get to start a chant, but the little bit that we were in started chanting, "We want 7," and then Jota scores, and it was perfect. And then we looked at each other and went, "We want 8."
Verbruggen heard you, obviously, because he basically just gave it to Jota, didn't he? So 7-0, and despite, weirdly, there was 4 minutes of stoppage time in the first half and 9 in the second. And I'm just thinking, no one wants 9 minutes of stoppage time.
and then, literally, I was like turning to him and go, "Oh God, there's only 2 minutes left."
Okay, so nonetheless, a very, very good afternoon for Forest, winning 7-0. We'll talk about a few bits to do with tactics and, of course, the big number 11 after this.
The 1865 Match Report.
Hi, it's Rich here, and thanks as always for listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast. Now, as promised, we have got an exclusive pair of tickets to give away for the audience with Billy Davies coming up at the Albert Hall on the 20th of February. In order to win 2 tickets for this event, all you need to do is answer the following question. So the question is, who was the first signing that Forest made, on loan or permanent, after Billy Davies took over as Nottingham Forest manager in his first spell? So who was Billy Davies' first signing as Nottingham Forest manager? To enter the competition, you need to email your answer to forestramble@gmail.com with the subject line Billy. That's forestramble@gmail.com and the subject line Billy. We will have a look at the answers after the closing date of the 4th of February, and the winner will be emailed with details of how to claim their tickets. So, who was Billy Davies' first signing as Forest manager? Email forestramble@gmail.com with the subject line Billy. We'll notify the lucky winner after the closing date of the 4th of February. Good luck!
If your football team had one option in their playbook, the results probably wouldn't be great. The same could be said for your investments. SIBO index options like SPX and XSP can help expand your investing strategies with cash settlement and potential tax advantages. If you're ready for a more dynamic game plan, head to betterwithoptions.com. SIBO, life is better with options. Your investments could be too. There are risks associated with SIBO company products. Review the disclosures and disclaimers at SIBO.com/US_disclaimers.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast.
Welcome back to the 1865 Match Report. Now, Baz, I just want to spend a few minutes talking about a few bits and pieces. Firstly, Chris Wood. One of the things, obviously, Murillo and Wood signed their new contracts last week, and then it all went wrong at Bournemouth. But one of the things that we've talked about, and I've heard George talking about on this podcast, is Chris Wood. One of the key things about him is that despite being 33, to me, he's looking leaner, fitter and stronger than I've ever seen him before.
Yeah, and I can remember when he first signed, when Steve Cooper brought him in, he didn't look the part. He didn't look very mobile at all. Like, it looked like he could barely run.
Yeah.
Whereas now, although he's not going to ever do like a Stan Collymore beat 4 people and put it
He did it last season at Newcastle.
But he is very, very mobile. But what he does is that timing and that knowledge of when to be mobile.
Yeah. So the first few yards in your head, as the old cliche goes. I mean, obviously he's in supreme form. Look, we're not going to preempt what might or might not happen on transfer deadline on Monday, but can you see Taiwo going out and maybe getting another striker into players backup?
Possibly. More for Taiwo's benefit than
get him
ours.
Some minutes.
Yeah. Because he's not going to get in the side with Chris Wood in this form, and when he does get in the side, he's going to get people going to jump on his back because he just hasn't got the minutes so far. What I was thinking is if he does go out and we don't get someone in, I'd rather see Jota playing up front than on the wing, because then he doesn't have to defend.
Well, yes, there is that, yeah.
I'd also, just to add in on Chris Wood, is he makes a point of saying it in all his interviews. He doesn't do it by himself. Anthony Elanga has made him supreme in the last few games. Anthony Elanga is playing out of his skin at the moment.
And interestingly, so Elanga's been at City Ground for a season and a half. He's had 24 goal involvements in that time for £15 million, was it, that we signed him for? That's what a return. And, you know, he's one of those players, isn't he? He either looks really good or really not, if we put it that way. But he seems to have a really good relationship. He knows where Woody's going to be, and Woody knows where Elanga's going to put it.
Like that goal the other week where the two just headed it, headed 1-2. So when did you see that? Exactly.
And it's worth pointing out as well, I believe it's on the Match of the Day interview tonight, so it might have been with one of the commentators, because it wasn't with our Colin, let's put it that way. And Elanga was saying at 3-0, we went in there and the first thing I said was, we're not done yet. And that you mentioned that Forest looked a little bit kind of passive in those first few minutes of the second half. The ghost of Southampton's going to hang around, and the ghost of Bournemouth is obviously going to hang around. And he said, if we do it right, we can do what Bournemouth did to us last week. So this goes back to the point I made earlier on in this report, which is that if you're going to get absolutely hammered, firstly, I didn't see us winning so emphatically. I'm not even sure I saw us win, because you're never quite sure after a good run and then a defeat how you're going to react.
Well, and part of me was thinking, again, like as Nuno said, that's 7 goals we've conceded in 3 halves of football.
Yeah.
And I've not really watched any of the. I couldn't really bring myself to watch the Bournemouth goals back, but from what I can hear of it, and what happened with Southampton was pinning us back and then running from deep in a line at us seems to have been what undid us.
Yeah, I mean, I think
trying to play it round us while we're deep doesn't work, but just running straight at us while we're deep seems to have had a thing. So part of me was thinking, I wonder if we've been found out a little bit, if people have figured this out.
I mean, the thing that's definitely worth saying and repeating is that last week, I was going to say all 11 players. Actually, Elanga was the only one who came out last week with who could hold his head not high, but with not hang his head. I mean, Milenkovic last week went from being the Serbinator to Mr. Muscle, and it was one of those things whereby actually there were players showing they're human, having played out their skin. So sometimes that can be a bit of a reality check for players who are playing at a level above what they might have done before. But you mentioned about that kind of maybe tactical element that Southampton and Bournemouth had. Do you think the 3 at the back was a response by Nuno to that?
I think yes and no. It was not in a sort of... partly it was a response to Brighton, because that's the way Brighton play. Even if they didn't play 5 up front, they still push their fullbacks forward. That's the way they play. So it was partly about that, and then it was also, partly about stamping, like saying, right, we're going to do things differently this time. We're going to do it properly.
Because my thought when I heard the team sheet, and also actually as the match went on, was I was just thinking that obviously bringing Danilo in refreshes the midfield, adds a bit of energy and something that maybe hasn't been there. I think Dominguez and Yates are both, I mean, obviously everyone looked bad last week, but they're both prone to looking a little bit leggy, I think.
And also Danilo was outstanding in that not only was he doing the defensive stuff that Dominguez and Yates were doing, but he, as I said, it wasn't necessarily that hard, but he was picking out the passes to open up our attacks as well.
And I mean, you've answered the next question I was going to ask, which was going to be to do with his performance. I think the other thing with regard to midfield as well is that I think where Forest have won and lost a lot of matches this season has actually been in midfield, because it's about setting those traps. So do you think this was also Nuno's way of saying, yeah, we're going to find different ways of setting those traps and actually, you know, making it more difficult for the opposition to second guess the way to get through us?
Yeah, and I mean, as I said, the midfield kind of played as a flat three. It wasn't Gibbs-White in front of them, and so that meant that, because obviously Anderson and Gibbs-White and Danilo are all very, very hard workers, but all three of them, when they receive the ball under pressure as well, can do a little trick or a turn or whatever to relieve that pressure, which maybe Yates can't.
Yeah, and I don't think that that's necessarily going to be a sustainable midfield three in every match that we play. You know, there's going to be teams who maybe have a slightly different presence than Brighton, but also, yes, obviously great to see those players doing so well. And the final thing that I will say is that I heard Stuart Pearce on Talk Sport. He was doing co-coms, and he's saying that the thing that impressed him most all the way throughout the match, he's saying that actually Brighton weren't necessarily that bad for spells, but it's, in that sense, I think that Forest did to Brighton what Bournemouth did to us last week, because we could have scored a couple of goals at Bournemouth on another day, but they just kept going and overran us, and they exploited every little weakness that was there. And so I think Forest did that today. And I also think that what Stuart Pearce said is absolutely important, which is that all 11 players on the pitch at any one time were working their socks off on and off the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. And you could see it at the final whistle, the way the players celebrated. Some of them on the pitch ran over to the substitutes bench and picked up the substitutes and stuff like that. It was all about getting everyone involved in it. I
didn't see this, but I heard that during stoppage time, Murillo was stood in front of the dugout with a Forest flag around his shoulders.
After the whistle and the players start going round to applaud the fans, and Murillo leapt onto Morato's back, which was quite amusing. And then the way he came over and applauded the fans and blew us kisses and stuff was... they would look like genuine joy and happiness of being at the ground, which was fantastic. And then Ola Reiner as well took his shirt off and handed it to a little girl just in front of us as well.
He's a good lad, isn't he? And it's nearly 30 years since you and I went away to Sheffield Wednesday and saw Forest win 7-1 on that day. And let's remind ourselves, not that I'm bearing a grudge, but their goal came from a really dodgy penalty. How did today compare to that?
My two favourite memories of that 7-1 were, first of all, at the start, Brian Roy stood on the ball in front of an open goal, and I turned to you and went, "It's going to be one of them days, isn't it?" And then afterwards, there was that kid on the bus.
Oh, yes.
And we were holding up our fingers, going 7, and he was just shaking his head.
Yeah, just couldn't believe it, could he?
And then I'm just thinking, we sang this at the Brighton fans, which is there's going to be a lot of Brighton fans on a very lengthy bus journey back, just shaking their heads.
Yes, and while they're contemplating their lengthy journey home, we're going to say thank you very much. Thank you to Baz. As you may know, regular listeners, we quite often get a fan from the opposition to do us a voice note. I did ask my contact and they said they couldn't do it today, and I suspect they're probably quite grateful now. So thank you to them for considering it, but I understand. And then last but not least, as always, thank you, listener. We are going to bring you the edited highlights of the transfer deadline, if there are any, in our Friday 5 show, which will come out to you, surprisingly, next Friday. We've got, obviously, a bit of a gap in the fixture schedule, due to Forest not playing in the Cup against Exeter until the 11th of February. So we'll also be bringing you another episode of our Football Terrorist show next weekend. So in the meantime, thanks very much for listening, and we'll catch you soon. Come on, you Reds.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
The NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. 21 plus and present in select states. First online real money wager only. $5 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets which expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.